The Muslim Brotherhood is a very significant organization. It's been around a long time in the Middle East, and Hamas is a pro-Muslim Brotherhood group, or a Muslim Brotherhood-sponsored, really, terror group. And this, the group and the ideology behind the Muslim Brotherhood is to see a pan-Islamic, when I say pan, like universal, a pan-Islamic state. So that you have a group of Islamic nations that join together, if you will, in a coalition, and I would say even beyond that, to form an empire.
Welcome to this episode of Zion's Wire, the official podcast of Zion's Hope, where we bring you prophetic insights and biblical discussions with a passion for God, His people, and His plan for planet Earth. I'm Christopher Diaz, and this is David Rosenthal.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Dave. So we have a lot that we can discuss. There has been a lot going on. We just returned just a few weeks ago from the Middle East.
Yeah.
And while we were there and since we've been back, there has been so much movement with Hamas, with Gaza, and of course with Israel, the ceasefire, and everything rolling forward from that. So I think it would be great for our audience if we could kind of catch everyone up on what has happened and what we see happening and what is next, or could be next.
Good question. Yeah, you're right. So much has transpired in the last few weeks, and boy, if you blink, you miss it, because every day is a new adventure, it seems like. Obviously, we got some wonderful news with the release of the last 20 living hostages, yes. Israeli hostages released by Hamas terrorists, and President Trump really did an amazing job in terms of bringing these Arab nations together, Arab nations that many of which don't like each other,
right?
Let alone having issues with Israel. Many of them don't like each other, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on here today. But just thankful. I mean, I guess we need to pause and be grateful for those last remaining hostages. I mean, we were in Israel. We saw 3 times, really, in the last 10 months or so. We were over there, and what a privilege it is to be in the land of Israel, and what a wonderful reception we got on the part of the Israelis. When we came over, really just a few of us, and then we brought a group over, and the reception was amazing. They were so grateful in the midst of this war and the challenges that we would be there to support Israel, her people, and to bring a group over, I think, was really impactful for the people of Israel. And I know it really impacted us and our group,
Very
and
much so.
The reception was wonderful to see. Just so grateful that with all of the trauma and the heartache and the tears, and just wearing the Israelis down on this front over the last couple of years since the October 7th massacre a couple of years ago, it's just been so difficult in the land, and constant sirens, constant rockets coming in, the constant pain, open wound of having hostages still in Gaza over the last couple of years has been very difficult for the people. And, you know, Israel is a small country, not a huge population. And so when you're talking about 1,200 people who were massacred, taken hostage, everybody there almost feels like they know somebody who knows somebody. If you're not directly impacted by the situation, by knowing someone who's a hostage or who was killed, or soldiers who were injured or wounded, or killed in Gaza, if it hasn't directly somebody you know directly, it's somebody that you know of that has been impacted. And so it's been very traumatic for the people of Israel. Obviously, the people living in Gaza, the Palestinians, their lives have been upset in a significant way.
Absolutely,
Obviously,
yeah.
It's war. And it's tragic for those who are innocent on either side. It's tragic for anybody who's impacted as a result of war, but it's war nonetheless. And Hamas as a terrorist group just needs to be uprooted once and for all. And of course, that's the big discussion right now in terms of the peace announcement that was made by President Trump just recently, and in connection to the release of the final 20 hostages.
Yeah, and that just so happened to be that they released the 13th, which happened to be the last day of Sukkot, a major festival, last of the fall festivals. So it's certainly a very special day there in Israel as they took to the streets to celebrate, and rightfully so.
And it's normally a time of celebration because of the feast, but all the more so because of the joy of seeing those hostages released, seeing them be reunited with their family, their loved ones, their friends. It was great rejoicing throughout Israel.
Yeah. And definitely, wow, what trying to find the words to express, what a surprise to see these nations coming together. Many condemning Hamas and their atrocities, and calling for them to finally lay down arms and move forward with some type of peace agreement here. So,
and I would say that none of that happened by chance.
Right.
It wasn't that they were all just saying, let's just get along together and let's see if we can bring this to a nice conclusion. There was a lot of backdoor dealing, arm twisting, and President Trump, I think, was working, and his team were working very hard, not just in the last few days prior to the announcement, but for months. This has been ongoing, working behind the scenes with some of these nations. And I would say that there was some very significant things that were taking place to move particularly pro-Hamas nations toward this peace agreement.
Right. Okay, maybe we can touch on that here for a moment, because certainly there's no coincidence, and we've talked about this a little bit, just in the office, that there's no coincidence that you see the peace agreement come forward and hours later you see some other negotiations or signings happening that benefit Qatar, and there's some other movement as well. But it certainly draws your attention to say, okay, clearly we've made some give and take here.
Yeah, I think maybe if we back up just a little to talk a little bit about the nations that are involved in this and why they have the influence that they do, and then how maybe they were persuaded to finally come to the realization that they needed to be part of this group that President Trump, this coalition that President Trump was putting together to end this war and to get the hostages returned. There is an entity in the Middle East called the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's important that the people who are watching or listening to us, that they understand that the Muslim Brotherhood is a very significant organization. It's been around a long time in the Middle East, and Hamas is a pro-Muslim Brotherhood group, or a Muslim Brotherhood sponsored, really, terror group. And this the group and the ideology behind the Muslim Brotherhood is to see a pan-Islamic, when I say pan, like universal, a pan-Islamic state, so that you have a group of Islamic nations that join together, if you will, in a coalition, and I would say even beyond that, to form an empire that is run by Islamic civil law, religious law, on a regular, ongoing, daily basis. And so that you have an empire of Islamic nations that are governed by Islamic or Sharia law, and that one individual, a caliph, or you could say in Turkey, a sultan, that would rule over this Islamic empire. And so the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood is to see a pan-Islamic state or empire develop, where you have really one individual ruling over it, and all things are all Islamic, both in religious and civil matters. And so you have nations like Qatar on the Persian Gulf that is very, very wealthy with oil, petrodollars. And you have a nation like Turkey, who has a very, very powerful military and incidentally is part of NATO. You have those two nations that are pro-Muslim Brotherhood. The leadership in Qatar and Turkey are pro-Muslim Brotherhood. which means that they have an ideology that says we want to see a pan-Islamic state, a caliphate, an Islamic caliphate of Islamic nations all joined together, forming one union and governed by Islamic law. And so Qatar has the money, Turkey has the military power and the land mass. And remember, Turkey has done this before. During the Ottoman Turkish Empire.
I was just about to say, very reminiscent.
Yeah, the height of 1517 to 1917, you had Turkey, which really ruled the entire Middle East. The Ottomans ruled the entire Middle East. And so there is a push by the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, to reestablish the greatness of the Ottoman Empire, to form a neo-Ottoman empire over the entire region. And so you can see very clearly in the wars in Syria and Iraq and with what's been taking place over the past decade that his ambitions are to push or move the Turkish nation south in an effort to reestablish power throughout the entire Middle East. Qatar has the same ideology, and they have a lot of, again, petrodollars, and they also have a significant influential piece to play through their media component, which is Al Jazeera. So Al Jazeera is based in Doha, the capital of Qatar, and it has major far-reaching power through its media presence throughout the entire Arabian Peninsula, throughout the Middle East, and beyond, even to the West. So Qatar and Turkey have a pro-Muslim ideology, and therefore they were very supportive of Hamas because, once again, Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood aligned group. So it makes sense that Qatar was funding Hamas. Turkey was supportive of Hamas. And so the crazy thing about all this is that Qatar was playing the mediator's role even while they're playing both sides of the game.
Right.
And I would suggest that when Israel in early September went over and fired a missile directly at a facility on Qatari soil, going after the political headquarters, if you will, of Hamas in Qatar, that was intended to let Qatar know in no uncertain terms that Israel is saying, if you are, whether you're a negotiator, a mediator or not, if you're playing both sides and you're supporting Hamas behind the scenes, that we will go after you and we'll go after Hamas wherever they're being harbored. And I would say that Israel, and I have no evidence of this other than just my own thinking based on what I read and what I'm aware of, I would say that Israel probably didn't do that in isolation, but they probably had a wink from the White House, if I had to guess, saying, yeah, if Qatar is trying to play both sides, they're playing mediator, but if they're harboring and if they have the political headquarters of Hamas in their capital, that's fair game. And so Israel fired a missile to go after them. Now, there's a lot of talk afterwards that said, oh, Israel missed the target of, they didn't get all the people they wanted to hit in Hamas when they fired into Doha, into Qatar. I would say that was by design, that they did what they did. And very shortly thereafter, all of a sudden, we see Qatar very, very eager to be part of President Trump's peace initiative.
Move things forward very quickly, didn't it?
Move things forward very quickly. I would also say, I asked the question when we see what's going on with this peace initiative and all the nations that, were there and Sharm el-Sheikh, and they were all representing and saying they're, putting on a unified front against Hamas. I would say that some of them were there because of the arm twisting. I would say Qatar was there because of that. I'd say Turkey was there because of the arm twisting as well, because they're supportive of Hamas, and they have been, and it's no secret that they have been. So then on the other side, you have nations like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, and those are nations that are very concerned and fearful of the Muslim Brotherhood. They are monarchies, or you could say authoritarian regimes, and they are not interested in relinquishing their power. They have their own vision of what they want to see their country become. Some of them are exceedingly wealthy, like Saudi Arabia and UAE, and they have no interest in seeing political Islam, i.e. the Muslim Brotherhood, take over their countries.
Right. The radical behavior can really
And
bring a downturn.
they would be deposed or kicked out or who knows what. So they're not interested in seeing the Muslim Brotherhood. So there is these diametrically opposed views within the Arab world between countries like Saudi and UAE and Bahrain and Egypt versus nations like Qatar and Turkey, who again are playing a mediating role in all of this. And so that's the irony of what's taking place. So now when you fast forward to this peace plan and you say, okay, now all of these Arab nations are united as part of President Trump's plan for Gaza and to see its reconstruction. Well, behind the scenes, there's a lot of fighting between these nations. As a matter of fact, Saudi Arabia and UAE have already gone on record as saying that if Turkey and Qatar have a major role in, if America and President Trump and Israel gives Turkey and Qatar a major role in the reconstruction of Gaza, that Saudi Arabia will not have a major role and will by and large pull out of any reconstruction plans and won't be putting the financial muscle behind it. If Hamas stays in power, if the mediating team, which right now is Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt, if the mediating team does not facilitate Hamas laying down their weapons and walking away and demilitarizing Gaza, Saudi Arabia and UAE have said, this is a non-starter for us. This isn't going to go anywhere.
Right.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And we see certainly Erdogan, and what I'm reading is a lot of commentators calling it optics, that we're just kind of seeing them try to show that they're involved, but for the reasons that you just mentioned, there really isn't much they can do because the big players really are Saudi Arabia and UAE and Egypt and these guys.
I can't imagine, after all of the vitriolic rhetoric coming out of the president of Turkey over the last several years in support of Gaza, in support of Hamas, and against Israel in very, very derogatory terms, and against linking Netanyahu and likening him to Hitler. I can't imagine Israel saying to Turkey, yeah, sure, we want to give you a place at the table in a reconstructed Gaza,
Right.
or the governance, future governance of Gaza. I can't imagine Israel would open themselves up to having Turkey having any significant role there. So it may be that anything that we see taking place is more of a show to allow Erdogan to look like he's significantly involved. But I think it would be a major mistake on the part of Israel if they give Turkey any kind of meaningful role. I would say the same for Qatar as well. What I've read is that they're going to have a humanitarian role in helping the Palestinians in Gaza during this transition to a new governance. But it would be largely symbolic and not heavily involved in terms of the actual governance of a reconstructed Gaza or actually going in and rebuilding. So it remains to be seen, how it's all going to play out. But clearly, Israel has some major decisions to make along with the United States in terms of who is going to have access to Gaza, its new governance, and its reconstruction.
And they're really, maybe we turn to this for a moment, because right now, today, even at this hour, we're seeing some things really begin to show their face, particularly with Hamas. We have the hostages out, like we mentioned, and Hamas is now turning heavily on the civilians of Gaza, and not by small number. We're hearing large numbers of civilians that are being killed in public to make a scene, to go after people they think were helping Israel or giving any information. And I think even just a little while ago, Trump made an announcement that, hey, Hamas, stop, or we're going to come in and we're going to kill you.
Yeah, and really that's that's what needs that threat needs to be made, as President Trump did, and I think it needs to be enforced. You have many within Gaza who were risking their own lives to work with Israel to bring Hamas's rule to an end during this whole conflict. You have clans. It is very clan-based when you get into Gaza, and you had clans and militia groups that were against Hamas. And now that things are changing, and this whole agreement has been reached, you have Hamas now taking revenge against some of these groups, and there's been pleas for Israel or for an outside entity to come in and to protect the Palestinians who are now being targeted by Hamas specifically, which is really Palestinian against Palestinian.
Right. And I can't overemphasize, the sanctity of life here. We obviously we've supported the Israeli people. Likewise, innocent civilians we absolutely support,
Sure.
Regardless of being Palestinian or not. That these are people who need help, and it looks and appears like the nations surrounding that area are now saying, "Hey, we have to do something about this," and it's really showing Hamas in the light of who they really are.
Yeah, and Israel is such that, and their military is such that if they are very loyal to those who are cooperative and helpful with them. So if you had Palestinian people or groups within Gaza over the last 2 years that were helpful to the Israeli military or informing them of what Hamas was doing there over the last couple of years, Israel feels a real commitment to help those people and not to just give them over to Hamas now after they were helpful and cooperative with Israel. Israel doesn't want to see them hurt or killed by Hamas at this point. So Israel will do all it can, but in a certain sense, it's really kind of hamstrung because now you have this agreement. President Trump's announced the end of the war. So there's a lot of pressure not to start firing weapons again and not to start seeing the rockets raining down again, particularly after President Trump made such a pronouncement with world leaders, and the entire world was watching. So there's a lot of pressure on Israel to tread very lightly going in, but they at the same time don't want to see these Palestinians who were helpful to the IDF, to the Israeli military during these last 2 years. They don't want to see them killed.
Is there anything that would give us the reason to say maybe this has been a fog screen to bring forth, again, who Hamas really is? Because we know that under the current circumstances, there's no way to rebuild Gaza as long as Hamas is bearing arms, as long as they're free to roam the region.
It's a great question because you look at the situation right now, and you have Hamas sprinkled in all throughout the population, and that's the way it's been the entire last 2 years and prior. So I don't see how you have any different situation right now from the standpoint of Hamas is sprinkled into the population. It's very hard if they're not dressed in a unique way. Some of them are, but many of them are not, who are sympathetic to Hamas. So it's very hard to pinpoint who's an operative, who's a Hamas terrorist, and who isn't. And how you separate them to be able to target them becomes very, very difficult. So I don't see how the situation is a whole lot different prior to the peace agreement to after, from the standpoint of how are you going to get rid of these Hamas terrorists if they're embedded, and many of them are already weaponized. So it becomes almost like a voluntary, well, are you going to lay down your arms or not? Well, now, obviously, President Trump is trying to use Qatar and Turkey, who have influence with Hamas, to be able to dry up the money, to say, okay, we're not sending any more money in, we're not sending any more weapons supplies in. So if the Hamas operatives who were there in Gaza aren't getting the weaponry, they're not getting the finances, they're not getting the support that they've had in the past, obviously it's going to be more difficult for them to continue to operate the way that they have been. And that's the hope, and that's why President Trump was so intent on getting such a broad coalition, so that you can put pressure from those who gave support, like Turkey and Qatar, to be able to pull that support back and to say, we're no longer giving it to you, and therefore it's going to dry up, and therefore Hamas is going to have to lay down their arms. They have no other alternatives. How that plays out, we'll have to wait and see, how it goes. I'm not optimistic, but what I would say is, you talked about fog, or I would say a smokescreen. Is it possible that really what this was all about is, first and foremost, finding a way to get the bargaining chip that Hamas had, which was the hostages, to get those remaining living hostages out of Gaza, knowing full well that Hamas would not be able to keep the other points of the plan. And so now you have the pretext to go in, and I would say the other Arab nations, like Saudi Arabia, like UAE, like Egypt, like Jordan, that coalition of Arab nations, now they have the pretext to go in and say, look, now this is no longer Israel. This is Palestinian versus Palestinian. This is Hamas versus Palestinians. And so therefore now they have the justification before the whole world to go in and to root out Hamas once and for all.
Very important point. And that I'm fully on board with you to say, yeah, I think we should watch that very closely.
And I would say that there are many points in Trump's plan. It's like a 20-point plan, and it's going point by point by point. And the idea is, if this happens, then we move on to the next one. And if this happens, we move on to the next point. And I would say, when you look through the 20-point plan, there are many, many challenges there that have to be adhered to move on. And I think it's a long shot to say that that Gaza, specifically Hamas, will acquiesce or will follow the plan the way it has been announced and what they had agreed to. I would say it's going to be it's a real long shot to see that they would actually carry through on their end of the deal, which really means that the Arab world, the coalition, United States, Israel, would have really free reign to go in and to do what they think is necessary to completely root out Hamas once and for all, and to begin a reconstruction plan.
And with that in mind, do we see the paving of the way for Saudi Arabia to begin to move forward with the Abraham Accords?
Yeah, I think, again, another great point, and I think that that's ultimately where this is moving. I think, everybody thinks that Israel needs that deal worse than Saudi Arabia. I would suggest to you that they need it, that Saudi Arabia needs it just as much as Israel does, if not more. The reason I say that is that the Saudis are implementing a major redevelopment across their entire country. It's the Vision 2030 plan announced by the Saudi Crown Prince. It is a very aggressive economic, trade, tourism plan to completely redevelop and reimagine a brand new Saudi Arabia and introduce this brand new Saudi Arabia to the world. And I would suggest that for that to happen, you must have peace in the region. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is counting on tourism in ways that it has never seen tourism before in that country. And in order to do that, whether it's along the Persian Gulf, whether it's along the Red Sea, which I think they're trying to develop into a Riviera, the islands with the mountains that they have, the history that is in Saudi Arabia, so much they have going for them geographically. Obviously, it's a big sand desert, but the geography on the waterways and the topography that they have a tremendous asset there, and I think they're trying to turn it into something really magnificent and to lure the world there, to lure investment, companies, trade, tourism. And in order for all that to happen, you have to have peace in the region.
Right.
And you can have peace in the region if you have a Gaza with Hamas firing missiles into Israel on a consistent and ongoing basis, as they have been for the last several decades.
Right. You cannot have extremist behavior. And our visit, now I'm reflecting on that visit and our stop in the UAE and the importance of tolerance, that they have. And you hear it over and over again that you can, our tour guide, you could leave your phone on the table and go away, order some food, whatnot, and you can come back. It's still going to be there. the surveillance that they have and the way things operate, clearly so different than in some of the other regions, but certainly building up.
Yeah, and
More and more.
UAE, United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the two largest, most significant, I guess, cities you can say in the United Arab Emirates. We were amazed when we went there in terms of the things that we saw, and as you mentioned, almost no crime from the standpoint of just petty theft or things of that nature, because it's such a surveillance state, and you have cameras everywhere. They're watching everything. They have eyes and ears everywhere. But if you just went as a tourist, you really would have very little idea, other than the biometrics when you're going in and out of the airports. You'd have very little idea of that, the level of surveillance that's actually there. But I would suggest that that's significant from the standpoint that if the UAE has a major role in the redevelopment of Gaza, that I would suggest that the things that they're doing already in Dubai and Abu Dhabi are going to be used and implemented in the reconstruction of Gaza, so that they can create a protection mechanism around those who are involved in the reconstruction and those who have access to the areas that are being redeveloped, so that they can really tamp down on terrorism. They can tamp down on theft and corruption. So it's interesting when you start to consider what might be in a reconstructed Gaza, what the dynamics might be, and it really depends on who's involved in the reconstruction. If the UAE and Saudi are involved, you're going to see, I think, a lot of technology implemented in its redevelopment. You're going to see a lot of surveillance cameras, digitized IDs, all of those kind of things, and it may become almost a test ground for the whole region and beyond in terms of what can be done under the umbrella of we have to create safety and protection because of what Gaza was, and on those grounds to implement a lot of these new technologies.
Very interesting. And again, having been there, it's very easy to imagine what can be once you've seen some of these locations. And that's amazing. Now brings me to another question, and I think it's one that many people have as they're watching the news. They're seeing this, and they're like, okay, peace in the Middle East. It's being, in big letters across every TV screen. That's what we're seeing, peace in the Middle East. Is there any reason to believe, assume, think that this is the peace agreement that's going to begin to lead us down a 7-year path or bring us into the end of age? I'll throw that one out there for you.
Obviously we're watching carefully all these things. We're watching, we're listening, we're comparing to Scripture, with what we're seeing taking place. And those are good, healthy questions, that we all should ask ourselves. If you're asking me personally, I don't think that this is the agreement or the covenant that the Bible speaks of as a 7-year confirmation of a covenant that is coming in the future. But it's possible that this may be a precursor to that, or it may be a stepping stone towards a larger, more significant peace agreement that's agreed upon between Israel and her neighbors for a period of 7 years. I would say that that agreement is going to be in connection to a coalition of 10 nations or 10 kings. And again, an 11th, based on the book of Daniel, comes out of obscurity and leads over that coalition of nations. And it also, I think, has a lot to do with Jerusalem specifically. And there's going to be some type of, I believe, a reconstructed temple, the reinstitution of animal sacrifice, because we know at the midpoint of that 7-year period, the Antichrist, the leader of that coalition, breaks that covenant at the midpoint, at the 3.5-year mark, at what's called the abomination of desolation. So whether this could develop into something more, whether this is kind of an earlier, component, and as we move along, there are more nations that kind of come into play. it's possible. But if you ask me on the face of it, I would say this is very significant what's happening, but I don't think that it's the covenant spoken of in the scriptures. But we're watching carefully.
Sure.
And obviously, if we hear the number 7 in terms of the duration of a covenant, bandied about or proposed, obviously we're listening very intently and very carefully. But I don't think, at least on the current face of what we're seeing, that it fits the biblical description for that coming covenant.
And that's good. And I think it's also important then to encourage the readers in light of this, hey, get back. If you haven't been, get back in the Word and begin to read these things. There's so many great resources available through our ministry and some other great ministries. But at the end of the day, you have to be in the Word of God and studying what He says is going to come so you can be prepared.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so to our audience, I would say thank you for watching. And there's still so much happening. Stay close to God first. Stay close to His Word. Be in His Word. And track along with us. Download the app, Zion's Hope app. You can find it on all the app platforms. And visit our website, zionshope.org. Stay connected with us and keep watching.
Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Zion's Wire, the podcast fueled by a passion for God, His people, and His plan for planet Earth. If you were encouraged by today's episode, share it with a friend and subscribe, or follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Help us reach more people with the message of hope by leaving a 5-star review and download the Zion's Hope app for additional teachings and content. Keep the conversation going with questions or comments. Until next time, keep watching, keep praying, and keep your heart fixed on God's Word.